What changes, if any, should Dave Canales make to his coaching staff this offseason? And will there be a benefit to playing a last place schedule again in 2025? I'll answer those questions among other listener questions in this weekly Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter, @JulianCouncil. Why? Because on Wednesdays like today, throughout the entirety of the regular season, I'm right here answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions. Now, next Wednesday, it is Christmas Day, so possibly there will not be a weekly Wednesday mailbag then, but certainly heading into the finale at Atlanta, there will be a mailbag that Wednesday. Either way, following the game on Sunday, either at me or DM me over on Twitter @JulianCouncil. And if you feel so inclined, you can also follow me there on Twitter @JulianCouncil to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Wednesday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. This episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, let's do it. The weekly Wednesday mailbag is back here on the show, potentially the penultimate, maybe just the third to last weekly Wednesday mailbag in this 2024 regular season as the Panthers sit at 3-11, facing off in their home finale against the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday afternoon inside Bank of America Stadium. And there are plenty of questions that I've been asked throughout the season about this defense and why it has been so bad, and whether Ejiro Evero is to blame, and if we'll be back in 2025. And Chuck is once again asking me this question, and I feel like today on this mailbag will be the last time I answer any questions about Ejiro Evero until we get to the end of the season, where then we can look at everything in totality and decide amongst ourselves whether he should or should not be back. And I will give you my opinion on it now, and I'll give you my opinion on it in a couple of weeks' time once the season is over and we have seen all 17 data points of this Panthers defense with all the context and subtext that goes into it here in 2024. But Chuck asking and saying Carolina football, meaning Carolina Panthers, has always been about running the football and stopping the run. My question is, are people making too many excuses for Ejiro Evero to stay here in Carolina? Our run defense has been atrocious, and I'm sick of hearing about our injuries because, all caps, all NFL teams suffer injuries, yet somehow their run defenses come together and ours continues to suck. His words, not mine. Is it time for Evero to go after the season? Curious to know your thoughts. And I have had plenty of thoughts throughout the season about the job that Ejiro Evero has done and the lack of execution we have seen from the Panthers players. And of course, those injuries that Chuck does not want to hear about as far as excuses being made about this Panthers defense in 2024. Let's just take a look at the numbers. The Carolina Panthers on the ground have allowed 2,422 rushing yards and 5 yards per attempt. That is dead last in the NFL by a wide margin. They have also allowed 136 first downs on rushing attempts. The next closest team is Cincinnati, who has allowed 115. Again, by a wide margin, this has been the worst run defense in the NFL. The Panthers have allowed 5,407 total yards this season. That's 5.8 yards per play. Those are both 31st, only ahead of the also lowly 3-1 Jacksonville Jaguars. They're last in pressure percentage, but 8th in blitz percentage. So even though Ejiro Evero is sending the blitz, they're not getting home. They were getting home the previous 3 weeks, heading into the game on Sunday against Dallas, got home one time with that J.C. Horn sack on that third down on the opening drive for Dallas. Then after that, we rarely saw the blitz. We rarely saw any pressure, and Carolina got ran all over. And Cooper Rush had 3 touchdown passes, and Jordan Fuller is lined up multiple times on a touchdown drive with CeeDee Lamb, one of the top 5, top 10 receivers in the NFL. Make it make sense, but it gets worse, y'all. And we've already watched it with our own eyes, so we know how bad it is. But looking at the numbers, you really can soak it in and be like, damn, really? It's that bad? They've allowed 418 points so far this season. That's 29.8 points per game. That's already more than the 416 points they gave up last season. They are on pace right now to allow 505 points this season, which would surpass the 470 points allowed in 2019, which is a franchise worst. And that was a 16-game season. Even if this were a 16-game season, the Panthers are still on pace to break that record, as they would allow 476 points in 16 games. So this has been the worst defense in franchise history. And looking over at Pro Football Reference, they have their simple rating system that looks at the defense, the offense, the team overall analytically. And this defense right now is at a minus 7.7. The 2019 defense was at a minus 5.1. So again, significantly worse than even the worst defense in franchise history. So how can a coach who oversees the worst rushing defense, the worst total defense, the worst scoring defense in the history of the franchise come back in 2025? It's a legitimate question to ask, and all the criticism absolutely should be on him, as he's supposed to be coordinating this defense. But there are reasons why the defense has been this bad. And Chuck brings up he doesn't want to hear about injuries. When you don't have Derrick Brown, who is one of the highest paid defensive tackles in the NFL, a top 5 defensive tackle by salary and by performance, it's going to be tough to stop the run. Now, the one game you did have Derrick Brown, they could not stop the Saints. And later on this season, when they didn't have Derrick Brown, they could not stop the Saints. So with or without him, couldn't stop the run against New Orleans. But I would imagine had he played these last 13 games, the run defense is not nearly as bad as it's been. Shaq Thompson, who had an elite run defensive grade the last time he was healthy back in 2022. He missed last season with a broken leg. He's been out all this season with a torn Achilles, probably done in Carolina permanently. You lose him early on in the season. Josie Jewell missed some time. Trevor Wallace has missed some time. Some of the safeties have missed time, but they shouldn't even be asked to clean up against the run anyways. But we have seen a number of missed tackles from Nick Scott, who is now off IR, from Xavier Woods, from every single one of them. The whole gaggle of them defensively cannot tackle. But the guys that have been comically bad this season are the men up front. It's a line of scrimmage game. You build from inside to out. And that's what Carolina did offensively this offseason. The first moves they made were to sign Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Then they went out there and traded for Deontay Johnson, and then they went out there and they traded up to the first round to get Xavier Legette. Later on, they got Jatavion Sanders, and after that, they signed Jalen Coker as a UDFA. Building from inside out. Defensively, it starts up front. And they have already identified Derrick Brown as someone they want to be a franchise pillar moving forward. And unfortunately, he's been out this season with that meniscus tear. And his friends, who have to step up, have not helped out, have not been friendly at all. They have been the worst defensive line in football. So Ejiro Evero's scheme, you can question why the hell J.C. Horn is not following around CeeDee Lamb and why Jordan Fuller is lined up against him instead. But you cannot blame his scheme for A'Shawn Robinson, Deshaun Williams, Shai Tuttle, Nick Durbin, LeBron Ray, and everybody who's played on the defensive line this season's performances, because they have not been good enough. They have been terrible. A'Shawn Robinson's the only one who's even been kind of average. He, among 123 qualifying interior defensive linemen, according to Pro Football Reference, or Pro Football Focus, he is 77th in the NFL among 123. Everybody else is ranked in the hundreds. Deshaun Williams, who was cut, then signed back to the practice squad last week, is at 100th. Shai Tuttle, who is getting paid $6.5 million this year, is 111th. Nick Thurman is 114th. LeBron Ray is 116th. They have been terrible. So it does not matter who the DC is. It does not matter what the scheme is. If you don't have the talent up front, you don't have a chance in hell. And that has been the biggest problem for Carolina this season. Not necessarily the DC, but the lack of talent up front. Whether you had Derrick Brown or not, I'm thinking that those guys are still going to be liabilities. And looking just solely at run defense grade, A'Shawn Robinson has the best run defense grade at a 52.3, which is not good. The lowest is Shai Tuttle with a 31.8. So lower than Nick Thurman, lower than LeBron Ray, lower than Deshaun Williams, lower than all the other guys that have stepped up there, and he's getting paid $6.5 million this season. A'Shawn Robinson's getting paid $7.4 million. So your third highest paid defensive tackle is also your worst defensive tackle against the run. What do you do with that? I cannot sit here and defend Ejiro Evero. I can bring up all the stats. I can bring up the context of who they've lost. I can bring up also the context of those stats just brought up there from PFF of how bad these interior defensive linemen have been. But again, when you give up the most points in franchise history, at least on track to do it, the most yards on the ground in total in franchise history, it's hard for you to come back again in 2025. And I understand that David Tepper has taken a step back this season. It has not led to any more wins. I think it's helped as far as player evaluation when you look at what the rookie class has done so far, both undrafted and drafted players in 2024. I have a hard time believing he's going to just sit back there and sit on his hands and allow Ejiro Evero, who he held hostage some 11 months ago, wouldn't allow him to interview for any other jobs, even though he could be in Green Bay or in LA right now. And I imagine those defenses aren't nearly as bad as this one because they have more talent. I cannot imagine he's going to allow him to return next season. And even if Dave Canales, who has stood by his man this season and saying that it's not the scheme, it's the execution, well, at some point in time, you got to blame the scheme and you got to find a way to get better execution in the future. And I just don't see, after 2 years of sample size, where this defense has not been good against the run, and it even goes back to 2019 when Ron Rivera was forced by David Tepper, or at least encouraged to run a 3-4, because that's what they run in Pittsburgh. This run defense has been atrocious. So we'll see. Hard to argue for it, and really hard to argue against it. So we'll see what happens in a couple weeks' time, but that's all I have left to say until the season's over about Ejiro Evero and whether he should be the Panthers DC in 2025. I have a hard time seeing that being the case. All right, let's take a quick pause, come back, and I talked about this on Tuesday. The Panthers lose out, quite possibly. They're sitting in the top 2, which means thirsty teams for a quarterback like the Jets, like the Raiders, like the Giants would need to give the Panthers a massive haul. I had a listener bring up another good point about that, the last place schedule and how that could benefit the Panthers in 2025. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And let's go ahead and look over at FanDuel and how they're feeling about this game on Sunday. And they're feeling the same as they felt yesterday, as the line is still at 4.5, with the Panthers being underdogs, starting a brand new streak of being underdogs in the NFL. Their plus 176 money line over under is set at 46.5. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It's that time of the year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college ball playoff presented by Allstate live on True TV, TNT, TBS, and Max. Back here on the weekly Wednesday mailbag on Locked On Panthers, at me or DM me or on Twitter at Julian Council. Get your question in for next week's edition of the show. And on Tuesday's episode, I decided to give y'all some draft talk analysis, as Carolina right now, according to Tankathon.com, is sitting there 5th overall in the first round. And if they were to stay at 5th overall, I would think that quite possibly Mason Graham, defensive tackle out of Michigan, would make a lot of sense because this run defense has been hellacious. Or they could go edge rusher, Abdul Carter, Penn State. That would be nice. And quite possibly Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner out of Colorado. That would make some sense as well. But I think really what they should be trying to do is get some more assets. And the best way for that to potentially happen is if Carolina loses out. Now, as I said on Tuesday, I, Julian Council, who has watched 59 losses since doing this podcast and only talked about 17 wins, does not want to watch this team lose 3 straight, which would be 7 straight losses. And I don't think that would bode well as far as confidence in Dave Canales and his staff moving forward if they go from 1-7 to 3-7, positive momentum, playing some close games, but losing their final 7 games of the season. That's just me. I would think that the ownership, while encouraged, as I read a report this week, or at least last week, about the performance and how they have competed against the likes of the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles and even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to a lesser extent, they're encouraged by that. But they still want to win games. Going 3-14, only upping your win total by 1. The point is to win games. That would not be that encouraging overall if we look at that 7-game losing streak heading into 2025. But there could be a benefit, and that could be the Panthers sitting once again in the top 2. And there are teams that are hungry for a quarterback. And the Panthers arguably could be one of those teams with a Bryce Young plays the way he played, not last week, but the previous 5 weeks, and the Panthers lose close games against Arizona, against Tampa, and against Atlanta. It would make sense to give him another opportunity instead of drafting Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado or Cam Ward out of Miami, as those are the only 2 quarterbacks worth a damn worth drafting at all in the first round here in this upcoming 2025 NFL draft. So the Panthers are set with Bryce, even though there will be plenty of discussion of whether they should keep Bryce or go draft another quarterback, even though there's plenty of issues on the roster. And we saw that when Bryce was playing well, the Panthers were still losing because they can't stop the run, giving up 200 yards plus on the ground the last 3 weeks. They can't catch the ball, Xavier Legette. They can't hold on to the ball sometimes, Chuba Hubbard, and that led the losses, not the quarterback play. Plenty of areas that need to be addressed this offseason. And if the Panthers are up there in the top 2, they could address those issues by finding a sucker, just like the Bears found a sucker in the Panthers 18 months ago. They could find someone to trade the farm, and the Panthers could get that farm and be better off for it, like most teams are on the other end of these massive first-round pick trade compensation deals that we see all the time in the NFL the last couple of years. That would be a great scenario for them, even though on the surface, like, oh, they're still 3-14, they're still a bad team, and you lost your last 7 games. That is not great. But as far as team building goes this offseason and excitement possibly this offseason, that could be a positive for the Panthers. Now, Kurt asked me this question about what I said on Tuesday and just said now, saying I preface this by saying I agree with you that I'd rather win out. Good for you, Kurt, because that's what we should all want. However, To your point on Tuesday's episode, do you put any stock in the fact that not only would losing out help draft spot, but would ensure a last place schedule for next year? Winning out could put us in third place of the division, which would give us Green Bay and Dallas next year instead of Chicago and the Giants. With next year being another rebuilding year, it's not the worst thing to have as many winnable games on the schedule to help things along. And I do agree that next season will also be another season where the Panthers are likely rebuilding and trying to build towards something bigger. And I get it's year 3 for Bryce. It's going to be a big year as far as figuring out in the offseason of 2026 whether to exercise that 50-year option. And I do think the Panthers should give another opportunity based off of, I think, what I've seen this season. That's what I'm leaning towards. I could change my opinion in the next 3 weeks once we have all, I guess that would be 12 data points this season. He's only going to have 12 starts this season as long as he stays healthy and starts the next couple of weeks. I'll look at those 12 games. I'll even look back at year 1 with a grain of salt, of course, and then really come to a decision of whether I think he should be back next year. But right now, feels like that's what they should do. I just don't think they should be chasing after a quarterback because that's what's got them in this position in the first place where they gave up a ton of compensation and they've remained a bad team. So we'll see what they decide to do. But right now, I think Bryce coming back is probably where things are headed as of right now on December 18th. But a decent point you bring up there, Kurt, about having a last place schedule again. And the Panthers are having a last place schedule right now, and they're 3-11. So it's not like they're stacking up wins with a last place schedule. If you don't get better, it doesn't matter. In the NFL, the whole not for long thing, it matters here. We already know they're going to play the Falcons, Saints, and Bucks 2 times next season. They're also going to play the AFC East. And my God, when I saw this, I just started laughing and also was just apoplectic because of why has my beautiful city just been doused in blue cheese and buffalo sauce of all these people who love Buffalo yet don't live there. The Panthers have to play the Bills at home next year, which means it's going to be a road game. It's going to be the biggest of the road games they've ever played in that stadium. Because it's going to be nothing but Buffalo fans, and I hate everything about that. They get Miami at home. They have at New England, at the Jets. New England should be a winnable game. The Jets should be a winnable game, as both of those teams have a lot to figure out this offseason. As long as Tua is healthy, Miami will not be easy. NFC West, Seattle, we'll see what they do with Geno after this season, but that will certainly be a test at home. The Rams will be a test at home as long as Stafford's healthy and they're healthy overall. At San Francisco, imagine that will be difficult. At Arizona, I will see. They're not a bad team this season. We'll see what they are next season. Then they would get the third place team or fourth place team in the NFC East. And you mentioned Dallas. If Dak's healthy, they're going to win games. If he's not, they're not going to win a lot of games, but they still beat the team Carolina brought out there on Sunday. And in the NFC North, either Green Bay or Chicago. Now, I would love to go watch the Panthers play at Lambeau Field. If they play the Packers next year at Lambeau, I'm going. So I'm actually kind of interested in getting to third place just to have the Lambeau Field experience, which I've heard from all the people who went back in 19 was awesome. So I would be all for that. But that would make the schedule obviously harder because I'm guessing the Packers are going to be better than the Bears next year, but I think the Bears will probably be improved in year 2 of Caleb Williams. So there could be a benefit to having last place schedule, but look at what's happening right now. They're still losing. So the team does not get better. And a way to get better would be to potentially get into the top 2 and get a bunch of assets and go add more players at positions of need that are younger, that are talented, and have a nice cost-controlled rookie salary. That could help them in the future. So we'll see what happens. I don't want them to lose out, but there could be benefits. And the only benefit, and not the only benefit, is the potential of being in the top 2. It could also be the schedule, but we'll see how that all works out in 2025. All right, one more quick pause. Come back, answer a couple more questions here on this weekly Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. A few more questions here on this weekly Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Panthers. Again, at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council. Follow me on Twitter at Julian Council. Also over on Blue Sky at Julian Council for all my thoughts on this team and to get your mailbag questions in for next week and the week after that. Wilson, he asked me this question actually last week. Totally forgot to put it on the show. And then he came back and said, well, part of what I asked you kind of got erased because of how the Panthers played on Sunday, but still, same question as a week ago. And now I'm going to answer your question. So apologies on missing that one. How much of the credit does the coaching staff deserve with recent performance? My opinion is this roster is so devoid of talent outside the offensive line that they shouldn't be anywhere close to teams like the Eagles and Chiefs. With Dave Canales actually calling up plays to let Bryce throw the ball down the field and the defense punching way above their weight until Sunday, of course. Curious if we should be optimistic with this staff moving forward, pending we're able to keep them. Yeah, so kind of goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. While there could be a benefit to being 3-14, possibly being in the top 2 of the draft, and also getting the last place schedule and avoiding the Packers next season, even though I want to go to Lambeau, that would mean the team lost 7 straight games. And I don't know how you can feel super encouraged about this staff if they go from 1-7 to 3-7, feeling positive about it, playing well against KC, playing well against Tampa in a game they should have won and they threw away. And then same kind of case of Philadelphia should have won that game to an absolute stinker against these Dallas Cowboys. And then you lose your final 3 games. And it all depends on what it looks like, obviously, when it comes to what you're going to do with Bryce Young this offseason and how you're going to feel about Canales. But the record is the record. I'm not going to quote Bill Parcells, but damn, y'all, if you go 3-14, I don't know how encouraging that is coming off of a 2-15 season where the quarterback was benched for 5 weeks this year. And there's still plenty of questions of whether he's the right guy. I would feel good about the staff if they're able to go 2-1 down the stretch here in the last 3 weeks. They win all 3 of them, get to 6 wins, triple the win total like I had hoped they could do heading into the season. That would encourage me. But 4-13, 3-14, not really. But yes, you should be at least encouraged by how they bounce back against 2 bad teams and the Saints and the Giants. Understand that. Giants are worse than the Panthers. The Panthers won that game, and that's a game they almost gave away. Then how they played against KC, you're right. That should not be a game that's ever close. But whatever, NFL, any given Sunday, blah, blah, blah. And KC's letting everybody in these games, including the Raiders. And then Tampa, you should have won. But Philly, you bring that up. The Eagles went out there and put their hands all over Pittsburgh on Sunday. Yeah, they're punching above their weight as far as that. Defense is terrible. That's going to have to be addressed. And until they get more talent there, I don't really know how good I can feel about the defense moving forward. But you did bring up a good point about Bryce throwing the ball down the field. I was looking at that Cowboys game on Sunday compared to the Eagles and Chiefs game. This is from NFL Next Gen Stats. He only threw 2 balls down the field, 20 yards on Sunday against Dallas. It was 1 for 2. One was a touchdown, was an interception. So actually it was 2 for 2. Then against the Eagles, he was 2 for 7, One of those intercepted. Another one of those was dropped by Xavier Legette. So 4 for 7. And then against KC, 2 for 7. So both against KC and Philadelphia, 7 times they tried to stretch the field, where on Sunday, you didn't really see it. And that one interception was just Bryce trying to make a play later on in the game. So really, the only time it threw down the field was it a touchdown to Adam Thielen earlier? I can't remember what the touchdown pass was in that game on Sunday. But it's going to have to depend on how they play the remainder of the season. They can win some games, depending on how encouraged you be. But you are right. Devoid of talent, primarily outside of the offensive line, where there's still questions there after Sunday. Iquano, anybody. And I'm really curious to see how they finish this season. As appetizing as finishing 3-14 and being top 2 could be because of the sucker that's out there and getting those draft picks, Lord. If they lose 7 straight, that's not a good thing. Final question coming from Nick. He says, I know it's a small sample size, but between Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, Jatavion Sanders, and Jalen Coker, who appears to be the one that will have the longest tenure as a Panther? If you just want to go based off of contracts, Xavier Legette would be the answer because he has the 5th-year option that could be exercised after the next 2 seasons. But based off of how he's dealt with injuries this year, going with the hamstring back during the spring to the foot to now the groin, that may cost him the remainder of the season. I think probably should cost him the remainder of the season. He's got to get a wrist fixed this offseason as far as surgery goes. It's definitely debatable how long he'll be around, and have to understand too, the staff has to be in place, or not necessarily has to be in place, but the next staff, whoever comes in, whoever's the coaching staff, whoever's the front office staff, has to like the player for them to be here. And other elements like contracts and all that go into it. Jonathan Brooks, hard to say that he would be the guy considering the second torn ACL in that right knee in 13 months. He's likely going to miss the majority, if not all, of next season. So the first 2 years already thrown away there. And Chuba Hubbard will be back for his 3rd year, and he would be the main back then. So when is Jonathan Brooks going to get an opportunity to be the lead back? Are we looking at 2027? And is Canales still here? So that's going to be a big question about that too. So I would say he's the least likely at this point in time. JT Sanders hasn't really been a part of the game plan the last 2 weeks. He was really coming along, especially in that Chiefs game when he went down with that injury. And we'll see. I think he has a chance to stick around for a while. But really, if you look at it, it's got to be Jalen Coker. UDFA, I understand, but he's been their best of the rookie pass catchers this season. He missed those 3 weeks with a quad injury, and if he didn't miss those couple weeks, you wonder, does Carolina have Coker running that route and catching that ball against Philadelphia instead? Is he helping them win those games against KC and against Tampa Bay? Maybe. So if I look at it, I would rank Coker as most likely, because it just matters, can you play? And if you can ball, you can get an opportunity. But I would have Coker there first. Then I'd probably go Sanders, Legette, then Brooks at this point in time, just based off of, again, Nick, the small sample size that you've given me and not knowing what the other external factors are going to be that would make those decisions aside from just how well those players perform in Carolina. Let's kind of wrap up this edition of Locked On Panthers podcast for our Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where I'll be back for the weekly Wednesday mailbag. Maybe not next week on Christmas, but certainly the last Wednesday of the regular season. By the way, at me or DM me to get those questions into me following the game on Sunday. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. I'll be back tomorrow for another Locked In NFL crossover Thursday with our friend, what's Alex's last name? Alex from Locked On Cardinals.